which, as an actor and as a director, I'm always trying to do, is to understand why we do what we do. So Dawkins was a hero of mine, and I read pretty well everything he'd written. And then in 1996, at something called the Dimbleby Lecture, and if you forgive me, I'll read from my memoir, which is actually a quote from Dawkins, in which he says, "How do we account for the current paranormal vogue in the popular media? Perhaps it has something to do with the millennium," because this was 1998 or something, 1996, in which case it's depressing to realize that the millennium is still 3 years away. Less portentously, it may be an attempt to cash in on the success of the X-Files. This is fiction and therefore defensible as pure entertainment. A fair defense, you might think. But soap operas, cop series, and the like are justly criticized if week after week they ram home the same prejudice or bias. Each week, the X-Files poses a mystery and offers two rival kinds of explanations: the rational theory and the paranormal theory. And week after week, the rational explanation loses. But it's only fiction, a bit of fun. Why get so hot under the collar? Imagine a crime series, he goes on to say, in which every week there is a white suspect and a black suspect. And every week, lo and behold, the black one turns out to have done it. Unpardonable, of course. And my point is that you could not defend it by saying, but it's only fiction. Only entertainment. And he goes on to say, let's not go back to a dark age of superstition and unreason, a world in which every time you lose your keys, you suspect poltergeists, demons, or alien abduction. So here was I in 1996, and my hero is condemning the show in which I am becoming a rising star. What do I do? Well, I suppose if I were Mulder and committed to my beliefs, I would have resigned from the show and gone on and fought against the show and its misleading truths and blah, 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 blah. But I didn't want to do that. Life was going pretty well for me. So how do I deal with this? Well, first of all, there's another way of looking at the X-Files, which is that each week a mystery was posed, and each week a man had a certain solution, and a woman had the other. And each week, the man was right, and the woman was wrong.
Paranormal.
And yet, the women loved the show. So, what's that about? Then the next thing I thought about was, well, Dawkins talks endlessly about evidence. So, what was his evidence that this show is promoting paranormal belief? What is his evidence that we weren't watching the show as fiction and enjoying it as fiction? Indeed, many of my skeptical friends, many of my atheist friends, are tremendous lovers of the show. So how does that work? So Dawkins had actually not done any research, and yet made this case. Not only that, but I had occasion to meet him at a convention a few years later, and I wanted to talk to him about this. So I introduced myself, and he kind of looked at me sort of blankly and said, "Oh, were you on the show?" Which made me think he hadn't watched the show. So he had neither watched it nor done any research on its results. So with that in mind, I said, fine, let me go on doing the show, and I went on. Here I am. There is actually, though, there's a better case about the X-Files. could give some pause. There are certain, what I would call embedded assumptions within the show from time to time that are not examined by Mulder or Scully. They're simply accepted. And as a skeptic, I have a problem with some of these. You may remember, those of you who are fans of the show, a big healing ceremony for Mulder. I've forgotten what his problem was, but it couldn't be solved by modern medicine, so he went to a healing ceremony, and over a period of time, the healing ceremony saved his life. I don't recommend that you take that line of therapy yourselves, but it was a kind of embedded assumption that the spiritual, the native, the aboriginal, it is somehow better than Western medicine. Another assumption was at various times they were trying to get information about what had gone on in their earlier lives. So they would go under hypnosis. I think Scully went under hypnosis, and she got really frightened about what she found. But the idea that through hypnosis you can find repressed memory is one of the most insidious ideas in paranormal thought. It's pretty much been refuted now. It's pretty much, with a lot of investigation, that in fact, if you have traumatic experience in your early life, you remember it. You don't forget it. And it does not lock away into secret mystery. What does happen is a hypnotist or a teacher or a leader can make suggestions that you're not even aware that they've made, and you come to believe that there is a truth. And this is why and how people have come to believe they were abducted by aliens, and that's sort of fun. But it was also how people came to believe they had been sexually abused by their parents or their grandparents or whatever. And people went to jail for years on the basis of those accusations. They're now being all overturned. People are being released from jail that were put in jail under that kind of evidence. As a skeptic, one has to keep looking at the issues. I mean, some of them are obvious, some of them are not so obvious. Someone at a talk I did the other day said, well, maybe skeptics become a bad word. Maybe we should say critical thinking. And maybe that's maybe a better word, to look at these things critically. But I'll just I'll open to questions or comments in a moment. But I just want to go back to where I said I might have changed my mind about conspiracy. And I don't want to make a big, I made a passionate plea the other night about climate change, and I don't want to repeat myself. But it is a great concern of mine. And there's one thing that worries me a little bit about the skeptical movement, and there's the phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that kind of makes sense. We all kind of bought that as skeptics. Okay. Now we have an extraordinary claim that the burning of fossil fuel will sooner or later, and probably sooner, make it impossible for humans to live on the planet. That's an extraordinary claim. So, how much evidence do we need before we take any action? And that's what concerns me, is that we do not take any action in the face of this extraordinary claim. Not to be depressing, but we can have a very good scientist, very reputable scientist in the climate field, James Lovelock, predict that by the end of the century, 90% of the people on this planet will be dead. That the population will be reduced by 90%. That the effects of climate change will be so severe.